So, Cliff, thanks for joining us this week. And of course, this week's major story continues to be the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. And of course, the story really is ultimately the amount of really mass punishment and that the Israelis are inflicting upon the Palestinian people in Gaza. This week saw the Israeli government attempt to align themselves even more so with the Republican Party in this country, in part by attacking Secretary of State John Kerry for going ahead with trying to forge some type of truce or mediated settlement between the parties.
Right.
And yet for that, he was roundly attacked
And they
by
leaked
the Israeli
actually
government.
they purposely leaked some comments about him that were not so flattering to their newspapers, in a particularly, I would call it, disrespectful way of handling things. It wasn't sort of like they got up and they showed together that they were, we haven't made progress yet and whatever. It was really a sort of, a knife in the back, so to speak. But,
And look,
Bibi
let's-
Netanyahu has been a Republican for a pretty long time. I mean, if you look at him, foreign leaders have a practice of not endorsing anybody, and he endorsed Romney in 2012.
That's
he
right.
also had a well-known extramarital affair, which usually makes one a Republican. I'm just kidding, of course, not really. But in any case, he's been an extremist on their policy for a while, nothing's changing there. I mean, you put Netanyahu. If Netanyahu's running the show, and they're building more settlements. I just don't see how peace is ever possible when he's where he is.
Yes, indeed, and frankly, the Israeli population has been largely supportive of what the Israeli government is doing, and the reality is that in this country, our politics are such that very few politicians will ever criticize Israel. Very few politicians will even, in many respects, provide any empathy for the Palestinian people who
Right.
are being subjected to, in Gaza, living in an open-air prison, in the West Bank, living under occupation. And then, of course, we have mass casualties of civilians on the Palestinian side. A couple of civilians have died on the Israeli side, but literally a couple. And on the Palestinian side, we're talking hundreds of children, and some reports from the UN, 70% are civilians. And here's the thing that, of course, and I know that you, and I imagine that you, but I certainly don't particularly enjoy talking about this topic. It inflames a lot of people on both sides.
That's right.
But if you leave aside any of the debate upon who has a legitimate claim to the land that is now Israel, if you leave aside any of the claims of morality, et cetera, at the end of the day, this is unsustainable. And the policy that Israel seems to be exercising, and we focus on their policy because they are clearly the ones in power here.
That's right. And I'll say quickly to me, because it's not, I don't focus on them to in any way, act like those particularly members of Hamas or have anything but blood on their hands, and don't purposely try to target Israeli civilians, and don't purposely try to stir up trouble and lead, and they want this conflict too. Who we're talking about here are the vast majority of the Palestinian people who end up being caught up in this. And I would hope that I'd understand that if you live in a country where there are rockets flying in, you'd be more supportive of something like what Netanyahu is doing. But that doesn't change the fact that you also need to retain your compassion for civilians. When we were hit on 9/11, There were some voices in this country who just talked about going around nuking random places in the Middle East. It didn't make me think, having been in New York and frankly almost being killed that day, and I'm not saying I've ever been under constant assault like Israelis have, but it still doesn't make you suddenly go and want to kill civilians in a country where leadership. It didn't make me want to hurt Afghani civilians who I knew had nothing to do with it.
And the point too is that look, this is simply this is a physics problem. You cannot occupy a group of people. You cannot leave them in an open air prison and literally put them on a diet, as Israeli government officials have stated in the past that they wanted to do. Literally limit the amount of calories they could intake on a daily basis. You cannot do this and expect no response. And at the end of the day, it does not matter if you're driving a bus, full of convicts. You're driving the bus, and Israel in this instance is driving the bus. They are in the power position. They are exercising a policy that no one seems to be able to figure out where this ends, what this leads to, and they are losing support in this country. Now, it may be the case that the $3 billion that we offer in terms of foreign aid to Israel would give us no leverage in the future, but the Israelis cannot expect this forever. If you look at the polling, you see that support for Israel and our policies of supporting Israel drop off precipitously under people under the age of 50. When you look at Congress, you see that it is really the conservatives in many respects, the Christian Zionists, who have a far less critical perspective on what's going on in Israel than those who are Jewish in this country. And ultimately, this is going to catch up with Israel. It may be, again, that we have no leverage with them, but in the end, this is unsustainable for the Israeli government.
I don't mean to interrupt you, Sam, but it's not even catching up with them from the perspective of what we do to them. It catches up with them to what happens to them, in the Middle East, and what happens abroad, and hatred for them, and Arab governments that then much easier for them to use, especially some of the more corrupt ones, to use this to sort of demagogue against all Jews and against all of Israel, and convince their own populaces to hate the other, as opposed, it just makes it that much easier. It hurts Israel to do this, and that's, in the end, whether we change our policy or not, the thing is, I'm not sure. I agree 100% with you there, because, we've watched as, right now we don't have a very good functioning democracy, and the sad thing is really the people who write for most of the major organs out there, not just Jews but non-Jews, in the United States and appear on major television, and those in Congress, because as you pointed out, these Christian, Zionists as well as, more liberal Jews on other issues are have somewhat of a coalition that, it's the same way that you can have 70% of people wanting an increase in the minimum wage and 90% wanting background checks and whatever else, and yet it doesn't end up happening in Congress. That's my concern, is that they don't reflect the actual opinion of the rest of us out here. And my concern is that we just keep supporting them no matter what they do. And it doesn't help them. I don't know. I don't know why we didn't seem to get this with Iraq.